There we go. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for staying until Friday of the conference. I know a lot of people seem to have either been going home or sleeping in this morning. So thank you very much for coming out this morning to talk about unit testing, these new crazy Metro-style applications. My name is Peter Provost. I'm a program manager in Visual Studio Ultimate. And I've been a bit of a unit testing junkie for quite a while. When I first joined Microsoft 7 years ago, I was working for Jim Newkirk, who's the guy who wrote NUnit 2. And so you could say I kind of learned at the bosom there of one of the masters of both unit testing and TDD and unit testing in .NET. And when the opportunity came for me, where Cameron Skinner came and said, we're thinking about redoing some of the unit testing stuff for Visual Studio 11. Would you be interested in that? Oh yeah. So, and then when I found that I could actually be getting involved in the unit testing for the Windows 8 stuff, this was even more exciting. So, what we're going to be focusing on in here for a little while, so where's my clicker? There we go. So for the next 60 minutes, and you guys know we got these 60-minute sessions, for the next 60 minutes, we're going to go like this. First, I'm going to briefly introduce the unit testing capabilities in Visual Studio 11. And you've seen some demos of it at some of the keynotes and other things. And if you were in my Agile talk yesterday with Aaron Bjork, you probably saw us hit it there. But I'm going to hit it with a little more detail and show you some of the finer points of what's there and how the features work, and talk a little bit about the extensibility model. That part of it is not directly about just Windows 8 Metro applications. It's kind of across the board Visual Studio 11 unit testing capabilities. And I'll try to be clear and point out when I'm kind of being broad and when I'm being very specific about these Metro-style XAML applications. Then we're going to start taking a look at the challenges and the techniques and how we do unit testing with these managed XAML applications. And you'll notice I put managed there, so let me clarify there. I'm going to be doing all of the coding in that part of the talk in C# on a XAML application, okay? But it was interesting. I had a question just before the talk started, and the question said, does this also apply to other kinds of XAML applications, maybe Silverlight or other things? And I'll say the general patterns and techniques that I'm going to show you do. They apply across the board. And in fact, you could even say they apply across the board to all application types. And I'm going to be focusing on the managed ones. But if you were writing native, so C++ XAML applications, these techniques would also work there. You would just be writing your unit tests in C++. So I'll hit on some of that. And speaking of C++, I'm then going to bring up the test runner and bring up some C++ unit testing just to give you guys a bit of an overview there, because I want to make sure we get that covered. Do we have any people here who program in C++? Every day? Now the hands go back down. Yeah, I used to code in C++ too. Oh, you're up every day. Okay. So we'll be covering some of that. I'm not going to do a C++ XAML example, but there are some of those in your samples and in your SDK stuff that you can look at on the machines and in the MSDN downloads and all that other kind of good stuff. Then we'll do a bit of recap, of course. I'm hoping to have a few minutes at the end for questions. This is not one of those talks where you have to be totally silent and you're not allowed to ask me any questions, and then I'll tell you to meet me at the booth. Although I will be at the booth. I am going to go from here down there, and I will spend a couple of hours there if anybody wants to come and talk more about unit testing or Agile or TDD or any of those other things that we might hit. Two really key takeaways for you today. How the new Visual Studio unit testing features work, what we've done, why we've done it, what that brings to you as a Visual Studio user, and then how to work with your XAML application, in particular your Metro-style XAML application, because that adds yet another wrinkle in our complexity. How to work with all of that to make sure that you are delivering high-quality, well-tested applications. All right? So that's our agenda. Now, Before I go any further, I do want to briefly clarify and be crystal clear with everyone what I mean by unit testing. For me, unit testing is a method of testing very small bits of code, typically classes or methods, to confirm that they do what I think, as the developer, they should do. Okay? Focusing on the smallest testable part of an app as much as I possibly can. This means I try to resist bringing in long graphs of objects, and I try to isolate dependencies and decouple things as much as possible. It does actually force me into a bunch of very particular design patterns, and we're going to be looking at some of those. And I believe that unit tests are for developers. I actually prefer to call them developer tests. We write them, we run them, and we do it to make sure the code does what we think it should do. So just putting that behind us. But there is lots of other kinds of testing, and I'm just going to briefly hit on that so that we get that covered. Of course, integration testing is confirming that when we take these parts that we've previously unit tested and put them together, that they do what we expect. Now, we do typically do that kind of testing with the same frameworks and runners that we do unit testing with. So I consider it kind of an extension to everything I'm going to show you today. You'll do it the same way for the most part, and you'll keep on using your test frameworks to do that. Another one, though, is functional or system testing or even acceptance testing. This is where you're looking at whole systems top to bottom. You can do these in an automated fashion. You can do these with coded UI technologies and things like that. You can do them with manual testing. And then the final one is exploratory testing, often called session-based exploratory testing. This is an intentional and directed approach to testing very particular parts of the application to discover problems, to look for things, not just to confirm that it does what we decided up front, not conforming to the spec, but wow, that's kind of weird, right? Those are the kinds of features or bugs that we expect to uncover in exploratory testing. Matthew was just in here. Matthew's hiding over here. There you are. Was just in here in the session before talking about our new exploratory testing capabilities. And he was describing it in the context of building JavaScript Metro-style applications. But the capabilities of the new exploratory testing features are available for you across the board. And so I would encourage you to go and watch Matthew's talk or come in and talk to him or me down in the booth afterwards if you want to hear more about that. Now, this is kind of what I'm throwing out there, and I think most people at this point agree with me, but you'd be surprised how often I make statements like this in the booth and find maybe not argument from the dev, but argument from the dev's manager. And you guys may have run across this one. But I think it's crystal clear that effective unit testing and testing in general, automated testing, is the biggest contributor to high software quality. Unit testing in particular. Unit testing encourages good design, decoupling, highly cohesive components. It makes sure that they do what you think they're going to do. It makes sure that they work when they bring them all together. I got to look here just to make sure I get my statistic right. National Institute of Standards did a study, and they estimated that $22 billion a year in the United States alone could be saved by increased and improved software testing. That's a big number, a year. And so, unit testing is where we start. We're all devs. This is a dev conference. We're all about building things, coding things. I'm going to be doing a lot of it. This is where we start. We start by writing our own unit tests. So I said we'd get started by taking a look at Visual Studio 11, the new unit testing features, and also we're going to take a little look at our application. Now, I'll bring up the product in just a second. But let me talk about what this new window is. We have this new window called the Unit Test Explorer, and in your Visual Studio 11 Developer Preview, got to get that name right at least once, bits, you will find this window. It's hiding under the View menu, Other. Trust me, it's not going to live there. In fact, it's already been moved in builds after the one you have. But when you go looking for it, that's where it is. View, Other, Unit Test Explorer. And what this is this is now an extensible test runner. There's a lot of feedback we received over the years since we first shipped unit testing that not everybody wants to use our test framework. How many of you use NUnit? How many of you use xunit.net? It's just me? Oh, we got one over here. Excellent. How many of you use MBUnit? I'm going to have to tell Andrew. How many of you do unit testing in C++ with another framework? All right, so our C++ guy said yes, and over there too. All of these can now be plugged into Visual Studio to give the exact same experience in the IDE right here with your own framework, with whatever framework you want. And those adapters that provide that capability, that plug in for us, bring up all that data, and we get all of our failed tests, passing tests. We get our red-green bar. Sounds kind of crazy, but trust me, we had a lot of feedback. I want a red-green bar. I got one. So we got our red-green bar. We get stack traces. We get message outputs. We get logs. We get attachments, all the stuff that your testing framework provides. And I've had a lot of people coming up to me this week and sending me emails saying, I've got another testing framework that you've never heard of that we want to get plugged in. Spectacular. I want to hear about that, and I want to get them in there. And just as a bit of a preview heads up for you guys, we are already working very closely with the three managed frameworks that I just mentioned, NUnit, XUnit.net, and MBUnit, and you should expect to find releases from them for your developer preview within the next few weeks. So you'll be able to start up with NUnit and that stuff real soon now. Okay? Now, where is the Unit Test Explorer in terms of SKUs? That's another one that we've heard about. Well, I mentioned it's in your Express SKU for Windows. It's in all of them now. Unit testing across the board. You know, the year before I joined Microsoft, 7.5 years ago, I came to one of these conferences and I saw the announcement for all the new unit testing stuff, and I went and I started a blog post, and that blog post said, unit testing should be in every SKU of Visual Studio. If you agree, repost this. Before we had tweeting, right? So it was effectively a retweet. Sign this by commenting or sign this by reposting it. When I finally locked the thread down, I had a few million comments on it, basically saying +1, and all kinds of people retweeting it. It was interesting because I pushed send on that post about 2 weeks before I interviewed at Microsoft. Maybe not the best choice, but it seems to have worked out. So here we are. It's fast, it's scalable, it runs in Visual Studio, you pick your framework. Okay, great. Here are a whole bunch of frameworks for you to choose. And we've got our new native testing framework. Let's take a look at it. Let's see the bits. Okay. That one. So what I'm going to do, just to show you guys what this looks like for our native world, is I'm just going to go ahead and create a new unit test library project right here. And you'll notice that when I created that, I'm on Express, okay? And I said new project, C#, unit test library. Now, there is still a project template type, and I am going to be using MS Test as the test framework, because as I mentioned, we don't have the stuff from the other guys yet. And it is a special project type, but only loosely, and it's because we're in Metro land. Right? Metro runs in these app containers. So there's a little bit of work that the project has to do for us. It's not the same kind of a project template problem that we had in the olden days. And in fact, if you're outside of the Metro world, you don't have to have custom project templates anymore. So here we are. It wrote a test for us. I'll build it up, and we'll take a look at our Unit Test Explorer window. I mentioned that the Unit Test Explorer window lives over here in the builds that you have. It will later be in a much smarter place. And here's our little window on the side. Now let's write a test that actually does something. Okay, so we'll say assert is not null, and I'm going to reach down and use one of these new Windows RT APIs. So there's this interesting little one that I've been playing with a lot called known folders. It's in windows.storage. And I'm going to go ahead and just grab out the music library folder and assert that it's not null. Simple test. It's perhaps not a unit test. We could have that argument afterwards, Richard. I'll build it up real quick. Just in the builds that you have, I just want to be crystal clear on this. The test discovery pass, where we find your unit tests, happens after you build. So if you ever write a test and wonder why it doesn't show up over there, just build. It'll show up. Again, these are developer preview bits, so work with us here and give us feedback on how you want to see that happen. All right, so there's my test. I'll run it. It has to actually spin up an app container because, of course, we are Metro style, and the test failed. Now, if you were paying really close attention on Tuesday to all those sessions, there was actually Chris Sells, and those guys hinted at what my problem is here numerous times. And if we take a look, I've got an unauthorized access exception happening down here because I'm reaching into the file system. And this is one of the reasons that we have to have a special test project. You'll notice that just like with a Metro-style application, our test project has an AppX manifest file. And when we're going to reach into the file system, into the music library, we have to say that our test project demands that same capability that our application would have required. So I'll open up my AppX manifest file, and we'll go into the capabilities section, and I'll say music library. We'll save it down. Now I'm going to force a rebuild just in order to avoid a potential mistake here. But when I change the AppX manifest, we have to make sure that the AppX package actually gets redeployed. Okay, so that happened. We will check our unit test explorer, run our tests, and pause for effect. Green light. And that's, in a nutshell, what this unit test explorer is doing. Now understand that this window knows absolutely nothing about MS Test. For those of you who've cared about this very much in the past. Really, it knows nothing. The interface to which the programmers plug into this using NUnit and XUnit is completely agnostic of the framework. We don't know anything. If there's a stack trace, it's because they return us one. If there's information that allows me to double-click on a test and go directly to the code, something we've heard a lot of feedback about, that comes from the test adapters. Okay? And we got hyperlinks in here that can take me to all the places in the stack trace, messages, outputs, and all that other great stuff. So that's the loosey-goosey form, a very quick introduction to the product feature. And this is available to you in all of the SKUs. So if you've gone to your MSDN subscription and downloaded the Ultimate SKU, you're going to find it there for all of your other app types, in addition to the Metro stuff. All right, so that was our quick intro. Let me kick back over here and find my clicker. Okay, so we've seen the unit testing product, and we understand what that's all about. From the hands I've seen up, most of us have done some unit testing in either managed or native code. We're familiar with the frameworks, so we don't have to cover that anymore. We can now start talking about the challenges associated with unit testing managed XAML applications. Now, I have an application that I wrote here, and let's just start by looking at that, and then we'll come back and talk about what some of the problems are. Let me find the button. There we go. All right, so I wrote this little application that uses the Bing translator APIs. I don't know if you guys realize this, but I think it's been mentioned a few times in some of the other demos. All that Bing stuff's got cool web service APIs that you can talk to, and I wrote this app in just a couple of hours. It's a quick little XAML application that references the Bing API and allows me to do translations, right? So I can pick whatever language I'm translating from. I'll just leave it on auto-detect. I can pick whatever I want to go to. Let's try Estonian. And we'll say hello and click the button. Okay, pick a different language. We're good to go. All right. So this is the app we're going to be playing with, and we're actually not going to see it much more because I'm a unit tester and I don't really need to run the app to know if my health is good. So let's go ahead and swipe off the side here and get back to the code. So suppose I wanted to unit test this application. Right? Let's take a look at the structure of this app. It's a simple XAML page. Okay? If we look at it, and I'll just double-click on the XAML tab here so we can look at just the code of it. It's a simple XAML application. It looks like any other XAML technology that you've used. We've got our user control, we've got grid definitions, and we've got a bunch of controls in here. Now, also, it is using code behinds. So you'll notice all of these fields have x.name on them, which basically makes that field available in the code behind for the code to use. And in fact, my button, if we go up here, let me push the Solution Explorer off for a second, and we look out here at the end, we can see that the button is calling directly into a button click event handler behind. Okay, let's take a look at that guy. We'll go into our code behind file here. Scroll all the way to the bottom, and here is our button click event handler. And it's a typical Windowsy event handler. It takes an object sender, takes an event args. I spin up the languages services client, and then I ask it to translate async, and I take that result and pop it out to the text box. Okay? So let's test this. We will start, just as I did a second ago, by adding a new C# unit test library project. I'm not even going to rename it. All right. And of course, we have to take a reference, just like we would have done in the olden days, to our demo project. This is pretty typical stuff so far. Nothing interesting here yet. And we want to spin up an instance of the main page. Right? And let's see, we need to talk to the button click thing. Main page dot button click. Not there. All right, so if it's not there, why is it not there? It's not there because it's private. All right, let's fix that. We can do that. We'll make it public. Makes life a lot easier. Okay, so let's see. But hey, look, there it is. I can call it now. Excellent. Wonder what I should put there. I don't know. Let's put this. And I'll just new up one of those. Hey, look at that. Windows helps me. Yay, Visual Studio. Save the day. Okay, but a test isn't a test without an assert. I can't say that strongly enough. You have no idea how many unit tests I've found over the years that don't have assert. Seen a few of those, Richard? Right? You had a unit test, gets your code coverage up, doesn't assert on anything. What does that even mean? It passed. Yay. It just means it didn't throw, I suppose, right? That's a did not throw test. Okay? So I obviously need to check on, I need to assert on something. Well, I don't even know, what does this guy do? So I'll F12 my way back into him. All right, so it is taking inputs. You can see here it's taking the input from that one text box, munging it together with whatever this ugly thing is. This looks like me digging out the selected item and then pulling the object apart in order to figure out what the actual language code is. So taking these three values directly from the UI, passed them to the Bing Translator API, and then taking the results and directly smacking it into the UI again. Well, let's see if I do this. If I do this correctly, let's see, maybe what I can do is I'll say main page. I'm going to have to set all those things. So let's see, input text. It's not there either. So now I could go make the input text public, and the combo box public, and the other combo box public, and the output text public. So I make all the fields on the UI public, write my unit test to bind against them. This is not good. I hope you all are starting to see why this is bad. For a number of reasons. First and foremost, we want to test logic. And what we're actually testing is the user interface. So imagine later on down the road when you take this application that you've designed and you hand the XAML file off to your designer who's working in Blend, who wants to go and change the UI, and he doesn't want to use a combo box anymore. He wants to use a picker, or he wants to automatically determine it from some other mechanism. Right? You want to have speech translation that feeds into it or whatever. The point is, once the words are there, the words should become other words, and it should call the Bing Translator API. None of the rest of that about the UI actually matters for the what thing I'm trying to test here. Now, it is important to remember that before we ship our application, of course we want to test that when I type, when I click buttons, it all actually works. And that's what those other kinds of testing are all about. Functional, acceptance, integration, and exploratory testing are techniques you can use to confirm that the app works. What we want to do now is make sure that silly little translator function works. Okay? So as you can see, starting out here with our code behinds and our named variables and all that other great stuff, which is what, we've been doing since Windows Forms days and feeling the pain over, well, it's certainly, we've still got that problem, and we're going to need to come up with a better approach to get around it. All right, so let's go back over to slides for just a second. So there are some issues, and those issues are a result of two different important concepts that we have to deal with here. Okay? One of them is the app container sandbox. So I've mentioned the app container sandbox and how it isolates your application from the system. That's good. That's one of the main points here, is that your app is safe, it's contained, it can't do anything bad, all those other kind of great things. But it also is going to prevent you from using a lot of different .NET APIs, right? So that may prove a challenge for us when we get into unit testing if we're expecting to maybe get around things, right? Everybody ever used reflection to access private member variables while doing unit testing? You can't do reflection in a Metro app. Not like that. Not reaching into somebody else's reflection, right? If you get a type, you can get its type info, and from type info you can enumerate its members, but that's all here. That's all me and my stuff. You're allowed to look inside yourself. You're just not allowed to look inside anybody else. So there are going to be challenges in terms of that a lot of the APIs we are familiar with from the .NET base class library may not always be available to us. And it does require a special kind of unit test project, because the output of the test has to be an AppX. It has to be an actual Metro-style app in order for us to ensure that it runs in an app container, that it has its capabilities manifest, and all those other great things. So there's a couple things we have to deal with there. And then there's the XAML issues. Has anybody here programmed for the phone? All right, keep those hands up. Silverlight, WPF. See, I got almost all of you now. So you're probably familiar with a lot of this then. That the stuff I just showed about testing those XAML files is a challenge. It's really a similar challenge that we have in the web with web forms, but that is addressed if you use ASP.NET MVC because the controller has separated out the view logic. Similar problem we had in WinForms and web forms as well. So what are we going to do? Well, that code in the code behind was actually the problem. It's actually a terrible place to put code. It sounds great. Brian's over here laughing at me. Why do you have a code behind file if it's a terrible place to put code? Because sometimes that is the right place to put code, and it's really when it's about the UI. The XAML file is a UI file. The code behind file should be also about the UI. Don't put business logic there. Don't put the stuff you need to unit test there. So that's my recommendation to you as we move forward, and you're going to see now we're going to start working towards cleaning that up. Key elements to success for unit testing across the board. Okay? These are rules that I give everybody, and I've been saying for years, so this is not about Metro specific. Design for testability, first and foremost. Make sure that you think about testability from the get-go. It has a lot of wonderful side effects. Your components are decoupled. They are cohesive, which means they're single-focused and single-minded. They're not sloppy. They don't mess around in other people's stuff. Test units in isolation from each other, and that means you have to isolate your dependencies. You're going to often have graphs of objects that depend on each other. You might depend on a database. You might depend on a service. You might depend on a keyboard input. You might depend on a charm contract. Isolate yourself from those. Use interfaces to isolate yourself from them. This is going to make your life a heck of a lot easier when you want to unit test it. And the final one, write your tests while you code. And now I'll go ahead and do what Richard asked me to do and give a little props for test-driven development. If you're doing test-driven development, if you're working on an agile team, how many of you work on an agile team? Keep the hands up. And how many of you do TDD? You can put them down if you don't. Okay? So, test-driven development, write your tests first, then see them pass. Write your tests, see them pass. It guarantees that you're writing your tests while you code. It also guarantees that you get designed for testability. It guarantees that you get unit testing in isolation and that you isolate your dependencies. You can't not do the first three if you do TDD. It's just simple. This is one of the reasons I like TDD so much. I keep jumping over here to see you guys because you're kind of behind the monitor wall. All right, so now let's do the real part of this talk. Let's actually get into the code and let's do some real testing here. Let's actually figure out how to test this silly application. Okay. Here we are. So what we need to do is we need to get all that code, we need to get all that important stuff out of our XAML. Hey. We good, boss? It all just went out for a second. Okay. We need to get it all out of there. So let me just start by, I'm just going to delete all this test code that we wrote. because we need to think a little bit. We need to design for testability. Well, it would be nice for us if all the data that was inside of that, like the input text and the output text and the language that they've chosen and all that other stuff, if that stuff wasn't being directly sucked out of the actual XAML view, that would be useful. So we're going to create a little class to help us do that. I'm just going to call it page data. Okay? And as you've seen a number of people do today, in order to, so you don't have to see me type poorly, I'm going to do that. Aren't snippets wonderful? Now, let's talk about what this page data is for just a moment. Okay? Look, it's got a language combo item, which is probably a poorly named class, because in fact it's a data object. It has nothing to do with the UI. It is a language name and a language code. So English, EN, Spanish, ES. Simple stuff. So I could probably rename that guy. It's the from text and the to text. And then there's this other stuff, this I notify property change stuff. What's that all about? This is an interface that's been around as long as XAML has been around, and what it basically says is anybody who later binds to this or connects to this class wants to be told if a particular property's value changes. Now, for those of you who've done XAML before, and a bunch of those hands went up, I want to show you a little challenge that you will face in the developer preview. 2 choices. I think this is a bug. I filed a bug on it. And I'll tell you from my own experience, pick the one in Windows when you're doing Metro-style applications. Pick the one in System when you're doing the apps over there in the blue. Okay? And when you're in traditional XAML, Silverlight, WPF, etc., you only have the one. You have system.componentModel.INotifyPropertyChanged. And you might hear me call it INPC, because you start to get short. So we're going to pick the second one. It's exactly the same interface. Unfortunately, there it is. Now what that interface it gives me this event, which I can then call. And there we go. We're good to go. So that's the way other people are going to connect to this data class in order to be told. And we need to do that because we know that eventually what our code's going to do is it's going to take the input text, pass it off to Bing, get the answer back, and push it into this data object. And the view needs to be watching, it's observer pattern, watching this particular field, the to text, the output text, the result text, in order to get that to work. So it just saved, you guys didn't have to see me typing many dozens of lines of code there. Okay, so we have that. Now let's start our cleanup process on our XAML file. I'll go back over to mainpage.xaml here. Now, remember that what we had was 2 text values and 2 combo box item values. So we got 4 things to do in total here at this point. So here's our first text block. It's the from. Okay, and it has a, sorry, it's this one down here, text box where people type. I'm going to go down here and I'm going to start by saying text equals binding from text. Okay, and that just says later, when that data object is smacked on the page, make that magic happen. And the other guy is going to do the exact same thing. Text equals binding to text. Now, there's one little thing missing here. Bindings have a mode, 1-way or 2-way. We want these to be 2-way. So I'll do mode equals 2-way. I'll put that on this one too. All right, so text is hooked up. Now we need to hook up the combo boxes. They're right up here. Now combo boxes have a nice little bindable property called selected item. Right? And since oops, that was not the button I meant to push. Go back. When I populate this combo box, I populate it with those actual items. That's why you saw me in the original click handler dereferencing all that garbage down and casting it and getting to the code. So here I'm going to bind to those same ones, binding from lang, that's what I called it. And the other guy is going to say binding to lang. Now let me show you what that lets me do. There we go. Okay, it's very dark up here. I can't see the keyboard. So what have we done here? We've bound our combo boxes to this data object. We've bound our text boxes to this data object. We've got two-way binding on the text fields. That's important. All right, that's a good start. Now, we haven't actually told this XAML file to use one of those data objects. We need to do that. Hey, this is a place for the code behind file. There are lots of other ways to do this, but this is how I'm going to do it. Now, I'm going to create an instance variable of it. Okay. And the property that we use to make this happen is called data context. This has been around in XAML forever, so it should be familiar to you if you've done this before. So now what we've done, we newed up an instance of that thing. We put it onto the binding context. That means all those binding expressions now will work. We should be good to go. Let me just build to make sure I haven't introduced any compile errors, although normally you guys are pretty good about yelling at me when I do. So, did I get one? Ah, yes, I did badness. Thank you. You gotta give that to me when I do it. You guys are all just laughing down there, waiting to see how long it takes him to find it. Page data, page data, page data. And now I got not enough room for curly braces. Or too many. I think it's too many. That looks better. Did you notice? Have you ever known that? This is a little tip and trick for you. I used Control KD, which is formatify your file. If it doesn't compile, it won't. A little way to find out, right? You don't even have to wait for the squigglies. Just run that little command, it'll tell you. Because he will not compile it. Okay, so we've got our page data, we've got that hooked up, we've got it bound. We really wanted to play with the button. There's one more interesting little pattern that we have to be aware of in order to do this. So we are going to take advantage of a thing called the command pattern in XAML. Again, been around forever. I'm going to introduce a command class, and let me show you why this works. We'll call it translate command. Now, if I go back to the XAML file real quick and we take a look at that button, because we know the button was the offending party here. And I'll just go ahead and break this into a couple lines so it makes it easier for us to see. There are a couple of interesting attributes that we can put on this XAML element. All right, so you'll see I can say command equals and command parameter. All right, I'm going to leave these alone for a second and we'll come right back to them. But since I have these, I know now that I can bind to something else other than just an on-click handler in the code behind file. This is going to prove to be exactly what we need to get this done. So let's take our translate command. When you bind to a command, it has to be an instance of the iCommand interface. Now this one only shows up once. All right, and let's let it implement that for us so we can see what it looks like. So we have can execute. This is the enable disable magic. We're just going to do the simplest thing that could possibly work. Return true. We have an event handler. This is used for that same binding notification technique that was used when we did iNotify property changed. And then we have the execute. Okay. So this is where we want to put that other code. So let's go over to the code behind. Let's just grab this code right here. Take it with us. Put it right here. And see where things start to get angry. Squiggly boxes galore. All right, so we got our little red lines there. We obviously have to deal with this. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to take that same page data object and pass it in through the parameter. So that means I can say something like this. Page data, PD equals, and we'll cast the parameter. And now that we have that, we can do a lot of cleanup here. This is actually going to get a lot shorter, and we're going to like this a lot. PD.toText, shorter. This is going to be the from text, so that's the input. And all this nasty dig around in the UI and cast things and play with all that, that all goes away. PD.fromLang, which is already the correct type. And this will be PD.toLang. All right. So now it's happy. My little Control KD check worked. I'll actually build it. Okay. That click logic is no longer in the code behind. It actually has no dependencies on anything XAML at all. The input to it was an object. We cast it into our own parameter data type. We're digging inside of there. We are going to call the service. And the astute of you are going, Peter, you really shouldn't be calling this service directly. That's an exercise for the reader. I will tell you the nice thing about taking service references in Visual Studio is there is actually an interface there. And so I could choose to mock it out. We'd run out of time. Okay? All right. Now we can write a test. So we'll go back over to our Solution Explorer. We'll go back down to our test file, and we can write a test here. So what we can do is spin up an instance of the translate command. That's good. We'll spin up an instance of the page data class. And I don't know if you guys have seen this trick yet, but it's my favorite thing. On-the-fly initialization of classes, it's great. So we're going to say the from lang is a new language combo item. We're going to say the toLang is a new language combo item. Now these guys have to have something set in them too. So we'll just do this. Look at that. Code equals en. So we're going to go from English. Too many thingies. And we're going to go to Spanish. Okay? And then we need some from text. We'll pass in hello, because I know that in Spanish. All right, so we're going to take this page data object, we're going to pass it into our command object. It's going to call the Bing service for me and come back, and it's going to confirm that we got the right result. So I should now be able to do this. Actually, we're not going to need a result, because do you remember what that execute does? He actually modifies the same page data object. So let's just do it. Let's say command.execute, PD. Now we should be able to assert, because a test without an assert is not a test, that we get back hola. PD.toText. Cool. Okay? Notice we now wrote that test. We now have very good coverage of the code that is in the code behind file. In fact, I deleted the code out of the click handler, didn't I? I deleted the click handler from the XAML file, I think. Nope. Let's make that go away. Let's delete the method itself just to be really sure he's not cheating. Okay? Build again. Now we'll take a look at our Unit Test Explorer while we're doing this. Stick that guy on the side over there. There's our test. It's still building. See the discovery bar was going by up there? All right, run it. So check it out. We were able to now encapsulate that logic, isolate that logic out of our code behind file, put it into an independent class that implemented the command object, test it, and confirm that it worked exactly as expected. Or not. Anybody know why? Let's take a look. Hey! The manifest. Our test is now leveraging capabilities in the AppX that call out to the internet. Now, of course, we probably should have fixed that. That was the thing we agreed on a minute ago, but right now it does. So our test project manifest now has to have the internet client capability. So we need to go over here, back into capabilities, and look at this, internet client. Thank you. Save. Let's build it up. Check our Unit Test Explorer again. The thing to watch for on the Unit Test Explorer is that red bar goes into the Cylon eye. And that's when he's doing discovery and tells us he's ready to go. Okay, run all is enabled. Let's go. Now this time, it's again going to do all that same stuff. Reach out to the Bing API using no XAML whatsoever. Reach out, call, pass. So what we now successfully got that code out. We successfully unit tested it. Now,
excuse me.
Yes, question. Yes, sir. Didn't see you because you were right in that dark spot.
Can you change the manifest on the fly from code to
No, you
test for
cannot
failure?
change. So the question is, can you change the manifest on the fly from code? And no, you cannot. That manifest it informs the Apex and when it goes through its launching process. And I'm not the expert on this field, so I would encourage you to go down and confirm with, get the Windows people to tell you what really happens there. No, you cannot. And that's because when you first launch an application that has one of those funny settings in it, Windows pops up a thing and says, do you want to let it do that? Okay? Windows says, is the user going to allow this app to talk to your music library?
So how would you test that you have the right settings in your application?
How would you test that you have the right settings in your application?
Yeah, a settings test, if you want so.
So you want to confirm that the capabilities file in the app is correct?
Exactly.
Well, I mean, the easiest way is to push F5. But all those other testing techniques that we talked about a minute ago, integration, functional acceptance, and exploratory testing, right, are all applicable at the application level. Right, what I'm trying to do here at unit testing is to confirm that core logic inside of my system is working. So we'll have to use one of those other testing techniques, okay? And in fact, Matthew was in here, as I said, in the session just before, showing exactly that, testing the application at the application level. And so if you weren't here in that session, I would encourage you to go watch it on video, and he'll show you how that tooling works. It's really cool. Even remote over to the slate. Great stuff. So come watch his talk again on video. Okay, thank you for the question. Let me jump back over to here. All right, so what we saw there, I'll just leave it here for a second. Again, what we saw there was we took that code out, we tested it in isolation, we took it out of the XAML, we removed a lot of the complexities, the XAML complexities from the problem, and it allowed us to focus on the code. We were still left with the complexities of being a Metro-style application in the app container. We can't get out of that one, because you do want to make sure that your app runs in that environment. You don't want to, you could in theory, hypothetically, take that DLL and pretend it's not a Metro DLL and test it, but you really wouldn't be testing correctly in the environment in which your app is going to run, and that gets a little sketchy and dangerous. So we got rid of half of that issues and problems list that we had before we started, and it was the most important half. Get your stuff out of the UI. Okay? Now, I mentioned that we would spend just a minute talking about native code, and I want to be clear, and I'm going to show you here that this is real Metro-style native code, all right, but the framework that I'm going to show you works either way. So we received a lot of feedback over the years since we first shipped unit testing that we had ignored the native developer, and in many ways I suppose we probably did. Our answer for a long time now has been, well, compile your native code with /CLR and test it in managed world. That sure sounds a whole lot like what I just said not to do when testing your Metro app, doesn't it? Which is test it in a completely different runtime environment. Right? Not a very good idea, and there's very good reason that people have been mad at us for that. So we invested quite a bit of time and money building a good unit testing framework for native developers. And if you're writing WinRT components for consumption by your Metro-style applications, you might find yourself wanting to do that. You may have some high-performance things that you want to do, and you want to get out of the managed space. You may want to create components that can be consumed by your JavaScript application. If you write those following the WinRT and produce a WinRT library, as Chris Sells showed, you can consume that directly from your JavaScript. So we have a nice terse syntax. It's fast. It's fast to author, nice and tight little simple macros that you use, typical C++ style. It's very performant and very lightweight. Tests are isolated, they don't pollute your environment, and all the benefits that we get from a proper testing framework. We worked hard to make sure that it really was. And it's got all the things you expect: fixtures, attributes, assertions, logging, expected exceptions, all those great things. So you write them in the same language you code, run them in the same environment that you run, and all the same rules are still applicable. Design for testability, test in isolation, run your tests frequently, and deal with the issues. You're going to have to deal with the fact that you're in an app container, and if you're writing native underneath XAML, you're going to want to deal with the fact that you can't really mess around with the UI very productively. So let me show you some of that. So we have, I have a little calculation engine here, just a little demo of something we put together to demonstrate. This is more about the unit testing of native than it is about designing native applications, because that's a talk in its own right. What you're seeing here is a test for a math component. And this math component is a WinMD or WinRT component. So what that means is, if I compiled this thing, I could take a reference to it from another Metro-style application, JavaScript or managed or native, and those references would be projected up into that runtime and would be available. So I would now have this math component, which of course is kind of dumb because it's just doing add, subtract, multiply, divide, but it shows the point. So it gives you a chance to see what this native unit testing framework looks like. Here's our test class with its name, and we define test methods. And there is a nice little assert. It gives you all the asserts you expect. It looks a whole lot like the other testing frameworks, as it should. Let's build. We're going to go through exactly the same path. Let's watch for the Cylon eye up there. C++ build has to finish first. Wow, you didn't even see the Cylon eye. This is native code. It is lightning. And the run is too. Let her rip. Got to click in the right place though. Pow. Now that pause at the beginning was us spinning up the WinRT process. There's really not very much we can do about that. There's a little bit of a pause as all WinRT processes spin up. That is going to come down in time. That's all part of the optimization and tuning we're doing for Windows 8 moving forward from here. We're in a developer preview, but still, that's pretty good. And just to let you guys know, we are testing this stuff with, as Jason mentioned on Tuesday, hundreds of thousands of tests. Okay? And the runtimes for all of our tests are on par or better than outside of Visual Studio. So we are getting NUnit runs that are just as good as NUnit GUI, XUnit runs that are just as good as XUnit GUI, et cetera, et cetera. And the native ones are just insanely fast. Okay? We worked very hard to get that. It's one of the biggest complaints of the previous versions of the product is that the test runner was slow. Trust me, I will not let it be slow. I'm a TDD guy. I want to go test code, test code, test code, test code, not test wait code, test wait code. Not interesting to me. Okay. So all the stuff is in there, and if I were to, just to kind of show you what's really here, we're getting all the wonderful new C++ IntelliSense once it thinks about what it's doing. You can see we got, there's what the macro expands to. Isn't C++ beautiful? Are equal, are not equal, are same, fail, fail implementation, fail on condition. We got all kinds of wonderful stuff here for us as C++ developers. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see how many people are leveraging the C++ capability of adding new functionality to their JavaScript HTML Metro-style applications or to their managed ones. Okay? So that was just a very light overview. I suspect in the future we will have more talks on testing and native. Come back over here. All right. We have a few minutes left, and I am going to leave you some time for some questions, but I'm trying to target us down here well. So in Visual Studio 11, we got this new focus on developer testing. And this is across the board, not just with Metro, not just with Windows 8. We work very hard to make sure that developers writing unit tests have a first-class experience. Use the framework you want, use the language you want. You choose, not me. To be completely honest, if nobody read another line of MS test in the world, I wouldn't be all that upset. I want you to write tests. Test your code. Save that $22 billion. Let's do good things there. Use well-known design patterns. Now, those of you who've done some Silverlight, have done some WPF, done some phone development, probably realized that what I did there when I extracted that page data class out was I did a pattern called MVVM. And I never mentioned it. What it is, we walked our way towards and uncovered a pattern that is model, view, view model. We created a view model. And we would have continued that all the way through. We would have eventually gotten to the point where we populated the UI with the drop-down combo boxes from the view model, and we would have tested that. Confirm that the text boxes are communicating back and forth, and confirm that. We would have made the button disable itself, and tested that, and confirmed it, and it all would have been taken out of the code behind files into view models and commands. So the way the model view view model pattern works is it says, take all the logic out of the view, put it in a view model, unless it really is just about the view. Like if it really is about moving UI elements on the screen and you're not going to unit test that or that kind of thing, maybe that belongs up in the code behind. But maybe it doesn't. Right? So that's what the model view view model pattern is about. I would encourage you, if you're going to be doing some of this development going forward, that you actually go and read about some of the other XAML platforms. A lot of wonderful material has been written about doing TDD and unit testing against the phone and Silverlight and WPF. Most of those patterns apply flawlessly here. So that means the technology and the techniques that you already know work. You get to keep doing what you already know. Now, there are a bunch of related sessions that I've already mentioned a few times, but I want to point them out again. There's developing testing on Hyper-V. I'm sure some of you guys went to that. The new Hyper-V in Windows 8 is marvelous, isn't it? Tips and tricks for developing Metro-style apps using XAML, also an important talk. Tim Hewer went through a lot of the tips and tricks for building these things out in general. Manual testing, that was Matthew's talk. Go back and find that one on video, it's great. And then the talk I did yesterday with Aaron Bjork about agile teams, where there we talked a lot more about test-driven development, about Scrum, about planning, and all those other great things. So I'm going to now open up the mics to questions. We've got 3.5 minutes. And then after that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start packing up, I'm going to continue to take questions, and we can go down to the booth and talk all day. Thank you very much. All right, I see you're at the mic first. Go ahead.
All right. In the Silverlight unit test framework, there's a lot of support for doing asynchronous testing, where you basically do like an asynchronous test complete call. Is there something similar now for the runtime?
So the question is about asynchronous testing, and one of the things I'm sure you've noticed is that basically all of the WinRT APIs, and as Jensen said on Tuesday, anything that takes more than, was it 50 milliseconds, is that what he said? Is async, are async. And all of them are awaitable, which means if you're a C# developer, you can use the await keyword and the async keyword, which is lovely. Unit testing there is a challenge. We don't have any specific special new capabilities for that right now in the developer preview. I know a lot of people have been starting to think about what asynchronous testing means even. Right? I know they did some interesting things in Silverlight, but now that we have async across the board in C# in the .NET 4.5, a lot of people are starting to think about how can we leverage that? Not just when we have to consume an async API, but when we want to produce an async API, or we want to leverage the fact that all these tests can maybe be spun off asynchronously and run in parallel. What does that mean? How do we leverage that? Ultimately, remember I mentioned that our test runner experience is completely agnostic of the test framework themselves. And a capability like that would actually be a capability of a test framework. So we are talking to the people who own the Microsoft MS test framework and XUnit and NUnit and all these other guys about, hey, have you guys thought about async? Have you thought about how to test in async land? Because one of the things you'll find is if you want to call an async API and unit test it, you've got to make sure that async API actually blocks and returns before you can assert. Because it may not have happened yet. It might happen later. It might happen now. Don't we love those flaky tests that might pass now and might pass later but might not? So I don't have a direct, my answer to you is I don't have anything special. Okay. A lot of people are thinking about it. And we're going to hopefully have some more for you soon.
I was thinking more in the context of usually events. You want to test that the events fires or similar stuff like that.
So again, that would be about adding extensions to existing test frameworks that provide those capabilities, because I'm completely agnostic of the test framework. Right, so we're going to be looking at adding those kinds of capabilities into those test frameworks. All right? Over here. Yes, sir. Nope. It's you.
Are you going to be able to run Metro unit tests on Windows Server 2000?
So understand that if you're going to run, so you guys heard the question, Metro unit tests on Windows Server.
Like if I have a build server or something.
Yes, all of the stuff that I'm showing you about the test runner, about this pluggable unit test experience works in the Team Foundation 11 build server.
What about the Windows runtime underlying pieces, though?
If you were on Windows 8 server, it's all there.
Okay.
Understand that you can't build or run a Windows 8 app on anything other than Windows 8.
I wasn't sure if the Windows RT stuff is actually shipping with the server piece.
On Windows 8 Server?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
As far as I know, we should go downstairs and confirm with the Windows team, but I've been told yes.
Okay. Cool.
All right, question over here next.
We have the issue that from time to time people, when editing the XAML, they screw up the binding. For example, forget to put two-way binding in there and just have the one-way binding, and then it looks okay, but it doesn't work. And any ideas on automatically testing this?
Yeah, so ultimately then what we really are talking about is testing that our XAML, that our UI is correct. Yeah, I've run into that myself. I mean, the first time I wrote this demo, I left off two-way on one of those and it didn't work. Well, the test ran. The unit test against the business logic ran because the business logic was populating the view model correctly, but it didn't present itself in the UI. So I uncovered it with acceptance testing. I ran the app, I pushed the button, I typed in hello, and hola didn't show up. We are thinking very hard, and Matthew over there in the corner is our coded UI test expert. We're thinking very hard about how to provide improved testing support at the UI layer. All right, what I'm showing you today is what's in the developer preview today, and is more about the coded testing your business logic, or testing the logic that's behind the UI. So we're still thinking about that, and I'm sure Matthew would love to talk to you more about what your specific scenarios are and what problems you've uncovered so we can see how we can help.
Yeah. I mean, what we see now is, I mean, to test the view model is not new to Visual Studio 11. I mean,
no, it's not at all. In
earlier,
fact,
so.
the point of the talk, if I wanted to make any, was that if you're doing MVVM and you're familiar and comfortable with unit testing there, you should continue. It works, and it works very, very well. But we've had a lot of people who've been coming to us saying, I see this new stuff, how the heck do I unit test it? I tell them about MVVM, and they say they'd never heard about it.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so for those of you who have heard about it, what I'm telling you is keep doing what you know. It is the best pattern for doing it. Okay? All right, I am now over time by 1.5 minutes. The red light is blinking and it's yelling at me. Thank you very much again. I will be down at the booth for at least the next 2 or 3 hours. I hope you enjoyed your conference and enjoy the rest of your time here.